of Summerville has released its final perspective on opportunity zones. I sit down exclusively with the town of Summerville's Economic Development Director, Micheal for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and download my free Quintin's Close-Ups app in your Apple or Google Play stores. Micheal, welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. Obviously, you are the Economic Development Director for the town of Summerville. And I reached out to you a couple of months ago wanting to do an interview with you about, obviously, the town of Summerville. And now that you guys have finalized the Opportunity Zone Prospectus for the downtown Summerville area, and I know that you want to talk about the work of the economic development, where do you start?
Wow. Economic development is a really broad term. It encompasses a lot of activity. But ultimately for us, it really is about one thing, and that's improving the quality of life for people in Summerville. We do that in a lot of different ways. Some of those are very familiar to people, typical commercial recruitment, opportunities to grow and expand our existing businesses. We look as well at annexation of commercial properties. So a lot of different tools we have in our toolkit, so to speak. I'm particularly excited about the Opportunity Zone designation. It covers a lot of our downtown area. We think that's going to be a great opportunity for continuing to grow our economy. But everything just rolls back up into quality of life. It really is about helping to build quality of life. Some of that is creating opportunities for high skill, high wage employment. We're very excited about the soon coming Trident Tech campus for Dorchester County. We believe workforce preparation is going to be a key part of that. But the more that we can do in terms of drawing commercial activity into Summerville, the more opportunity we give people who live in Summerville to work in Summerville. You reduce commute times, you keep money in the community, and all of those things sort of roll up into just a higher quality of life for the people who live in Summerville and Dorchester County.
What is the quality of life in the town of Summerville right now?
But we feel it's high. I think there is always opportunity to get better at everything. But we are in a fantastic place. We love it. We know that people love it. Not just the historic downtown, but we've recently, in partnership with the Chamber of Commerce and some other folks, started an advertising campaign, if you will, that talks about how Summerville is at the heart of it all. It really is kind of the heart and the center of the Low Country. You've got access, obviously, to downtown Charleston and all the historic and other activities that are happening there. You have access to the rivers, the sort of the natural infrastructure. So for people who are looking at outdoor recreation opportunities, canoeing, kayaking, those types of things, you've got ready access to the river. You have access to the plantations and some of the other things that really make the Charleston area a fantastic place to visit. And at the end of the day, you get to put your head down in Summerville. You get to visit the downtown, you get to see the great merchants and visit the restaurants and other places. And we do feel like the quality of life overall is very high.
And I know earlier you talked about, obviously, the upcoming Technical College coming down to Dorchester County, and you talk about workforce employment. What is the employment rate right now in the town of Summerville?
We actually have a really high employment rate. I think our unemployment rate in Dorchester County is even perhaps a little bit below the state average. The state average right now is in the 2.4, 2.6% range. And in Dorchester County, we are sub 2%. So folks are employed. I think what we look at from an economic development perspective is how do we create opportunities again for those high skill, high wage jobs that are going to help improve quality of life? How do we create opportunities for people who live in Summerville and want to work in Summerville? How do we give them the opportunity to do that?
Yeah. And I know earlier you talked about obviously the existing businesses that you want to help expand. How many are we talking right here?
We have, I just asked our finance director for the number a couple of weeks ago. We have, I want to say somewhere in the neighborhood of 700 businesses in Summerville. The folks that get a business license every year. And most of them, very honestly, are small businesses. They're local folks who said, you know what, I've got a skill, I've got an ability, I've got a vision for something that I want to do. And we certainly want to support that. The reality is it takes a very diverse economy to make an area work economically. So you've got to have the big box stores, you've got to have the national chains, and there's a place for them in the local economy. But we're certainly all about supporting our small businesses, creating an environment where they can flourish, an ecosystem where entrepreneurship thrives. And people have the opportunity, if they've got an idea, they can move from their garage or their spare bedroom or wherever they're doing this thing at into, eventually into a brick and mortar setting. And we want to make sure that we've got the environment, the ecosystem where that type of entrepreneurship can thrive.
Right. What is the future of entrepreneurship in Summerville?
We think there is a positive future. One of the things that we're very excited about is in the Nexton community right now, Home Telecom is actually building about a 20,000 square foot building that will provide opportunities for co-working and entrepreneurship. They'll use a small portion of the footprint for their own purposes, but the vast majority of that space is going to go toward co-working, entrepreneurship development. So we think there's we're putting together an ecosystem that works. One of the things that's a trend in retail now is something called a pop-up shop.
Right.
And so, we're very fortunate in that we have very few vacancies in our downtown area. It's not like once upon a time, late 80s, early 90s, we were like most other downtowns. We were half vacant. And a special group of people came together and said, we're going to do whatever we can to kind of preserve our downtown, to make sure that it becomes economically strong and viable again. And they were able to do that. And so we're fortunate now that we don't have a tremendous number of vacancies in downtown. But one of the opportunities I think we've got is to look at pop-up shops and give people who are running a home-based business an opportunity to experiment. It's just one more sort of step along that path from a spare bedroom or a garage to your own brick and mortar. And it's a chance to test out your theory and your marketing and all of the pieces that go into making a business successful.
And I got to go to obviously the opportunity zone, because I got the email while I was out running a few miles yesterday, and I took a look at it for a second. And I want to start off where it says connect dollar to dollar. Obviously, your dollar goes a long way in Dorchester County.
Right.
A business location with low operating costs. What are the low operating costs in Summerville?
I think the biggest advantage that we've got in terms of our positioning in the Charleston metro region is that our property, our inventory, is still more affordable.
Sure.
Your dollar goes a lot further in Dorchester County than it does in other parts of the Charleston metro, and so being able to reduce the amount of initial investment, whether you're a brand new small business, whether you are a national chain that is eyeballing somewhere in the Charleston region and you're not quite sure yet where you want to land, being able to reduce the amount of that initial investment to get you in the market is an important part of the overall consideration and site selection. And so as we talk to local folks who are interested in opening small businesses, as we talk to national chains whose names you'd recognize about why Summerville is a fantastic opportunity for them, the reality is that land and building costs go a long way in driving that decision.
And I want to go to the benefits of the opportunity zones, because I was reading this too. Yeah. Temporary deferral. Capital gains from the sale of a property held by a taxpayer can be deferred from inclusion in gross income if qualified under the opportunity zone investment that is made.
Right.
What are the typical capital gains in the town of Summerville?
Well, it's not necessarily about Summerville per se, but the way that the opportunity zone works and the incentive that it provides is you're an investor.
Right.
You sell an investment and you realize a capital gain, which means the asset appreciated in value. You have a window of 180 days from the time you recognize that capital gain to make an investment in what the feds call a qualified opportunity fund. And that's a fund that invests in business opportunities and properties within a designated opportunity zone. We've got one in Summerville that covers most of our historic downtown area. And so the idea is, as an investor, you make this investment in a qualified opportunity fund, and what you get to do is, first and foremost, you get to put off paying taxes on those capital gains until the end of 2026.
Right.
If you get into that investment prior to the end of 21, you also get a 10% reduction in basis for your property. So in other words, you get 10% taken off of that property tax bill. When you go to measure the investment, you get to, if you stay in for 10 years, any appreciation on that investment is treated tax-free for capital gains purposes. So, there's really sort of a multiple layers of benefit. You get the deferral to 26. You get the 10% basis in reduction if you're in by the end of 21. And whatever, as long as you stay in for 10 years, whatever appreciation happens on that initial investment is tax-free.
And from a town of Summerville standpoint, what does that mean for you all?
It encourages investment in areas that have traditionally been underserved. There are, in every community, there are locations that do not attract the type of investment that other locations do. And so whether you're looking at residential opportunities, commercial opportunities, this is designed to stimulate investment in those places that have not traditionally attracted investment to them.
And what are those underserved areas in the town of Summerville right now?
Well, the census tract that's designated for our opportunity zone not only includes downtown Summerville, the historic district and the commercial area just north of that. It also includes a couple of residential communities. One's Brownsville and the other's Robinwood. And those are located west of town, sort of between town and Maple Street, which is kind of where the western boundary of our opportunity zone is. So, it looks at how do we really bring investment into that particular corridor. And it's important for us to look at that from a holistic perspective, because what you ultimately don't want to do in bringing investment into an area is create a situation where you displace people. You end up bringing in something that works well but raises property values and therefore property taxes to the point where people who have traditionally lived there can't afford to live there anymore because they can't afford the property taxes.
And I know this is also the talk about increased basis, and it says this. Oh, I just lost it actually, but here it is. If an investor holds its investment in an opportunity fund for at least 5 years, the basis of deferred capital gains increased by 10%, effectively including 10% of the deferred capital gain from taxation. What does that mean for taxation for the town of Summerville?
It doesn't have any impact on Summerville's revenues. This really relates to an individual investor and their personal income tax. Once they recognize the capital gain, they would traditionally be taxed in at the end of that tax year for the capital gain. If they put that capital gain into a qualified opportunity fund, which then makes investments in these opportunity zones, they not only get to defer their personal property tax that they would pay on the capital gain, but if they're in by the end of 2021, then they get an additional 10% reduction in the amount of capital gains tax they'll pay on that particular gain.
And what is the typical personal income tax in Summerville?
Well, it's like everywhere else. It's all set by the federal government, and it's dependent on income. The great part about this really is it gives people who have the means to make these investments an incentive to do so, and ultimately, we believe, creates a rising tide that's going to lift all boats. It's going to encourage growth and development in areas where we want to see growth and development happen. The great part is for us, we monitor, we manage that very carefully so that what we don't end up doing is displacing people who may have lived in neighborhoods for their whole life and suddenly find themselves in a place where their property value has risen significantly.
And speaking of which, let me take you to housing.
Yeah.
In the Opportunity Zone packet, it says this: a need exists through the town for additional affordable housing, workforce housing, and multi-family housing, that is.
Yeah.
Where exactly?
Really throughout town. I think one of the things that we have seen in the Charleston area, we are very much a service industry related area. And so we have a large portion of our population that works in the service industry, which means typically lower wages. And so finding ways to ensure that we've got an affordable housing supply is significant, because the further people have to live away from where they work, the harder it is for them to maintain employment and for it to make sense for them economically. So Summerville, if you think about the downtown Charleston area particularly, Summerville is kind of one of the last stops before you really get down into the more rural areas of Dorchester County, and you find people saying, okay, if I can't afford to live here, does it make sense for me to continue to work here? I can manage the commute from here, but if I've got to go further out, there comes a point where it doesn't make economic sense anymore to work in another location and make that drive in. You're not even breaking even at that point. So for us, affordable housing is really important. We look at a lot of different opportunities to help make that happen. Obviously, a lot of people live in single-family detached homes,
Right.
but there are other opportunities. There's a concept that's sort of making a comeback these days called missing middle, and it refers to a type of housing that was much more prevalent prior to World War II, but in the industrial boom of the post-war years kind of got lost. And it's duplexes, it's triplexes, it's bungalows, and it's courtyard apartments, things like that. Ultimately, what those types of housing do is increase density. And that is one strategy for helping to ensure a supply of affordable housing. The reality is that land has a certain value, and if one person's using that land for a home, or if 20 people are using that land for a home, the cost of delivering utilities, the cost of delivering water and sewer and electricity, those things are constant. So if you're dividing that over one household, there's a certain rate. If you're dividing it over 15 or 18 or 20 households that may be living in a multifamily setting, or where you're increasing your density, that the cost per unit reduces. And so, it's not a perfect strategy, but it is an opportunity for us to explore ways to ensure that there is a supply of affordable housing, because, the reality is housing prices in the Charleston area have increased significantly in the last couple of decades.
And you talk about increasing density. What is the density now in the town?
It depends on where you live. I mean, there are, depending on, we have zoning ordinances which regulate how many units may be built per acre. There are, in some cases, for super low density, it may be as few as 2 units per acre. Other locations, it might be 5 units per acre.
Right.
But there are opportunities within our existing zoning laws to increase density. I think for some people, there's a misunderstanding and a perception that increased density drives down property values, and we've not seen that to be the case.
Okay.
I think it's an opportunity for us to explore, and we're sort of in an early stage of it in Summerville, but it's something that's important to us because it's important to our citizens.
And you talked earlier about supply. Where's that demand?
Well, demand for housing is really all over. I mean, you're seeing, obviously, communities like Nexton come up, and there are a lot of drivers for that. Mixed use development where people have the opportunity to live, work, and play in sort of a confined geographic area. It's very attractive for a lot of people. It's an opportunity maybe to spend less time on your commute. It's an opportunity to be home a little quicker, have more time with your family. There are certain conveniences associated with that, and for a lot of people that makes sense. There are some people, I suspect, who maybe get up and enjoy the drive into downtown Charleston every morning, but we want to give people the opportunity, if they want, to have employment in the community in which they live.
And speaking of employment, I know in the packet it also says something about a boutique hotel.
Mm-hmm.
How soon can we see that in Summerville?
That's a great question. We looked several years ago at a boutique hotel, and for a variety of reasons that project fell through. There's a community conversation getting ready to get started. Matter of fact, our local Chamber of Commerce is convening some discussion sessions this week and next to talk about, to sort of take the pulse of the community about the possibility of pursuing a boutique hotel for downtown. Obviously there are a number of hotels out by the interstate, and that this is not a reaction to them or an attempt to undercut, but something that we think could drive further economic development in downtown Summerville. We've got a fantastically walkable historic district, business district, and so, being able to bring something to the town where people can stay overnight, where they can contribute to the local economy, they can shop, they can dine.
Right.
We believe that's a positive opportunity for downtown Summerville, but it's important to make sure that we've heard every voice, and I think we certainly appreciate the Chamber leading those conversations.
And I want to go back to what you just said, mixed-use development.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, and Summerville has seen tremendous success in the mixed-use concept, obviously with Nexton, which I love.
Certainly.
And the project has flourished since breaking ground in 2014 and continues to grow. What is the biggest difference between 2014 and now when you think of mixed-use development?
I think there's a better understanding of what it can mean. And I think there were, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, there were some visions, there were some thoughts of if we could do this and if we could do this. And I think, what the last 5 to 10 years have done is sort of inform that with reality. When we were having these conversations 10 years ago and more, there was an impact felt by the Great Recession that really sort of slowed development in a lot of ways in a lot of places. So what we've seen in the last 10 years, though, is pretty consistent economic growth. We've certainly seen population growth. Since 2010, Summerville's population has grown about 19%. So, we've gone from 43,000 up to almost 52,000. As of 2018, and we suspect with projections that by 2023 will be north of 55,000, maybe 57,000.
Where will the infrastructure be in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, that's something that the town's obviously working on now, and I don't want to step on the toes of the folks who are kind of in the thick of that particular battle. But we're certainly aware. We're looking at population projections and making sure that as we allow new growth to happen, particularly as we think about allowing planned developments, neighborhoods that might be mixed use or might be strictly residential. We've gotten a lot more sophisticated about how we evaluate those particular projects. We look very closely, not just at the initial projections, but at the 10 and 15 and 20-year projections for how the financial element is going to work. The reality is these type of developments create long-term, they create bills. There's roads to be repaired, there's sewer and water lines to be maintained. So we want to make sure that as we're evaluating projects that we're looking at the 10 and 15 and 20-year revenue projections and beyond so that we know these projects are going to pay for themselves long-term.
We're in a discussion with the town of Summerville is there about smart growth.
I think, that's something we talk about a lot. The reality is, again, we want to make sure that growth not only pays for itself in the short term, but pays for itself in the long term as well. So it's important to us as we evaluate new potential developments that it makes sense to us from a space standpoint that we have the capacity to quickly deliver, utilities, infrastructure, all of those pieces, and that we're looking long term at how those bills get paid when they come due 20 years from now when the roads need to be repaired or when a pipe needs to be replaced. So, smart growth is, it's sort of an elusive term. A lot of people define it differently, and it's sort of, depending on who you ask, you're going to get a different sort of definition. But ultimately, a lot of it is about making sure that growth pays for itself and that it contributes to the overall sense of well-being that our residents have.
Well, Micheal Lisle, the town of Summerville, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome to Quintin's Full Self.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome.